Okay, strap in, everybody, because today we're going deep, deep, deep
Mm.
into the 19th century. We're
Ooh.
talking Victorian England, we're talking farms, and we were talking about one very special farmer named John White. So John White, Victorian farmer, but what makes him so special? Well, this guy, he kept diaries, and I mean detailed diaries.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
talking over 5,000 pages worth, spanning 55 years of his life.
55 years. That's incredible.
That's a lot of writing,
Er-
right? And this isn't just like, oh, feed the chickens today. This is like deep dives into his daily life, his work, his thoughts, everything.
Yeah, it's like a window right into his world.
It really is. It's a total goldmine, a treasure trove of social history.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting about these diaries is that they were written during some pretty turbulent times, especially for British farmers.
Oh, totally. I mean, we're talking about the time of the repeal of the Corn Laws, which was a huge deal.
Right, massive upheaval.
And then later on, the Great Agricultural Depression. It was a tough time to be in agriculture.
It was brutal. And, what's amazing is that John White, he didn't just survive these challenges, he actually thrived.
He did. And that's what we're going to try to figure out today.
Yeah, what were his secrets?
Like, how did this guy not only keep his head above water, but actually come out on top?
I think that's a question a lot of people would love the answer to today.
Yeah, I think there might be some timeless wisdom in these diaries, some lessons we can all learn from, even in the 21st century, right? So, before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's start with the basics.
Okay, sounds good.
Who was John White? Paint us a picture.
So John White was born in 1813, pretty standard for the time, right?
Yeah, nothing too out of the ordinary there.
But 1839, that's a big year for him. This is when he takes over Parsonage Farm,
Parsonage Farm, right.
located in Rickmansworth, Hertfordshire.
Got it.
And it's from this point onwards that he really starts keeping these super detailed diaries.
Like day one, new farm, diary time.
Exactly. And from what we can gather from his writing, he was a very observant guy, very dedicated, very meticulous, clearly took a lot of pride in his work.
He sounds like a real, get things done kind of guy.
Oh, absolutely. A man of action, but also a deep thinker. You can tell from his reflections in the diaries.
Yeah, okay, so now we've got a sense of who John White was, but how did these diaries, how did they end up being discovered? I mean, they're this incredible historical artifact, right?
It's a great story. So picture this. Two old wine crates, the wooden kind of,
Yeah.
just kind of tucked away in a museum storage room. Nobody really knows what's in them.
Ooh, mystery boxes.
Exactly. And inside, boom, John White's diaries.
No way.
It's like finding buried treasure, right?
Totally. What a find.
And Fabian Hiscock, he's the chairman of the Museum Trust, he was absolutely floored.
I bet.
He called it, and I love this quote, he called the diaries a treasure trove of social history, offering shovelfuls of information.
Shovelfuls. That's a lot of information.
It really is. It's an absolute gold mine for historians, and not just for agricultural history, but for understanding Victorian life in general.
I mean, it's like getting a first-hand account of what life was really like back then.
Absolutely. So much more than just dates and facts. It's like stepping into John White's shoes.
So the museum, they realize they've got this incredible collection on their hands. What did they do?
Well, they knew this was something special, something that needed to be shared, so they partnered with the University of Hertfordshire to launch this amazing project called Project Harvest.
I love that name, Project Harvest.
It's perfect, and the goal is to digitize the entire collection, all 5,000 pages, making them accessible to everyone online.
That's amazing. So anyone can go and read John White's diaries now.
Exactly. They're out there for the world to see, and the project also includes an exhibition at the museum bringing John White's story to life.
That's so cool. So these diaries, they were like hidden for all these years, and now they're being brought to light. What a journey.
It's a testament to the power of archives, right? You never know what treasures are waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely. But let's get back to John White himself. You mentioned that he lived through some really tough times for British farmers. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so imagine you're John White, you've just taken over this farm, you're full of hopes and dreams.
Ready to make it your own?
Exactly. And then, bam, 1846 hits, and the government decides to repeal the Corn Laws.
Oh, here we go.
So the Corn Laws, they were essentially tariffs on imported grain designed to protect British farmers by making foreign grain more expensive.
Okay, so kind of like a safety net for British farmers.
Exactly, but when they were repealed, suddenly you had all this cheap grain flooding the market from overseas.
And that must have been a huge shock to the system.
Oh, massive. It completely undercut British farmers, made it much harder for them to compete.
I mean, talk about a curveball, right? You're just starting out, you've got your plan, and then the whole market shifts.
It was a really difficult time for many farmers, and some just couldn't adapt.
Yeah, I bet a lot of them went under.
Sadly, yeah, bankruptcies were common, but John White, he weathered the storm somehow.
But it wasn't just the corn laws, right? You mentioned there was something else, the Great Agricultural Depression.
Right, so this was a bit later, started around the 1870s and lasted for decades.
Oh, wow, so like a prolonged slump.
Yeah, and it was a perfect storm of factors. You still had the cheap imports coming in, then you had a series of bad harvests, bad weather, so a lot of things working against British farmers.
Sounds like a nightmare scenario.
It was a really dark period, but John White, he managed to not just survive this, but actually expand his business.
It's almost unbelievable. Like, how did he do it? Was he just lucky? Or did he have some secret strategy?
Well, luck might have played a part, but from what historians are piecing together from his diaries, it seems like John White was very proactive, very adaptable.
Okay, so he wasn't just sitting around waiting for things to get better.
No, not at all. He was constantly analyzing the situation, figuring out how to adjust, and it seems like he had a few key strategies that helped him thrive.
Okay, I'm all ears. Spill the secrets.
So one of the big things was diversification. He didn't just rely on one crop or one type of livestock.
Ah, so not putting all his eggs in one basket.
Exactly. There's an entry in his diary where he talks about experimenting with new breeds of sheep to improve the quality of their wool.
Interesting. So he was always looking for ways to improve to stay ahead of the game.
He was, and this kind of forward thinking was crucial, especially during times of economic uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, diversification, it makes sense in today's world, but was that a common thing back then?
It wasn't unheard of, but it did require a certain mindset, a willingness to embrace change, and many farmers just weren't comfortable with that.
They were probably used to doing things the way they'd always been done.
Yeah, and I think that's where John White's personality shines through. He wasn't afraid to try new things, to step outside his comfort zone.
He sounds like a bit of a risk taker in a calculated way.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. He wasn't reckless, but he was willing to experiment, to adapt to the changing market.
Okay, so diversification was key. What else?
Another interesting thing is his investments. He was very shrewd about how he managed his money.
Okay, so not just diversifying his crops and livestock, but also his finances.
Exactly, and we're still learning about the specifics of his investments. The research is ongoing, but there are clues in the diaries.
Okay, like what kind of clues?
Well, he mentions investing in new equipment, which would have given him a competitive advantage, and there's even talk of him purchasing land, expanding his operation.
Wow, so he was playing the long game.
He was, and this suggests a real confidence in his abilities, a belief that even though times were tough, he could still build a successful future.
I mean, that's inspiring, right? It would have been so easy to just give up. But he had this vision, this belief in himself.
Absolutely, and I think that's a powerful lesson. Even today, when things get tough, it's important to remember that challenges can also be opportunities for growth.
Yeah, it's about having that long-term perspective, not getting bogged down by the immediate difficulties.
Exactly, and John White's story is a perfect example of that.
Okay, so we've got diversification, we've got smart investments, but there was one more thing you mentioned, his firm grasp on his business. What does that mean?
So this is where John White's meticulous record-keeping really comes into play.
Oh, right, the diaries. He wasn't just writing about his feelings, he was tracking his business.
Precisely. He was tracking his costs, his yields, his profit margins, everything.
Like a true accountant farmer.
It's almost like he was running a modern business, carefully analyzing his data and making adjustments based on the numbers.
He was a data-driven farmer before data was even a thing.
Exactly. And this gave him a huge advantage. He knew exactly where his money was going, where he could improve, where he could cut back.
So it wasn't just about intuition. It was about having that hard data to back up his decisions.
And that's a lesson that's still relevant today, right? Whether you're running a farm or a tech startup, understanding your numbers is crucial.
It's the foundation of any successful business.
And John White, he clearly understood that even back in the 19th century.
I've got to say, I'm really impressed with this guy. I mean, we started with, Victorian farmer, and now I'm seeing him as this savvy entrepreneur.
He was ahead of his time in many ways, and his story really challenges our assumptions about what it meant to be a farmer back then.
Yeah, it's not just about plowing fields and milking cows. It's about being adaptable, resourceful, and having that business mindset.
And I think that's what makes John White's story so fascinating and so relevant even today.
Absolutely. I mean, we can all learn something from his approach to overcoming challenges.
And it makes you think, if you were in John White's shoes, Facing those same economic upheavals, how would you react? Would you have the same resilience, the same adaptability?
It's a good question to ask ourselves, right? What can we learn from John White's story and apply to our own lives?
And that's the beauty of history. It's not just about the past. It's about understanding ourselves and the world we live in today.
I totally agree. And John White's story, it's a powerful reminder that even in the face of adversity, we have the power to adapt, to innovate, and to thrive.
And who knows, maybe there are even more secrets hidden in those diaries waiting to be discovered.
Oh, I can't wait to find out.
This is just the beginning of the journey.
Exactly. And who knows what other lessons from the past we can unearth and apply to our present and future.